Hello, and welcome to The Interview with me, Willy Lowry. I'm the Washington correspondent for The National, and in this series, we explore the relationship between the U.S. and the Middle East. With leading voices from both sides, we get at the heart of what really drives American interest in the region. Our guest this episode is Major General Pat Ryder, Press Secretary for the Department of Defense. General Ryder is the face of the American military at a time when its unbridled support for Israel is being questioned, and as the region edges closer to a wider and even more dangerous war. General Ryder, thank you so much for joining us. I want to start along the Israel-Lebanon border. Israel and Hezbollah have been engaged in a series of escalating tit-for-tat exchanges really since the immediate aftermath of the October 7th attack. But in recent weeks and recent days, the rhetoric has really ratcheted up. How close are we to seeing a full-scale conflict break out along that border?
Yeah, well, first of all, Willie, I really appreciate the opportunity to chat today. The tensions along the Israel-Lebanon border are something that we've been monitoring very closely since Hamas's attack against Israel on October 7th, nearly a year ago. And we've really worked hard to advocate for a diplomatic resolution to those tensions, and so we continue to do that. To your point, we've seen since October 8th tit-for-tat strikes. We've seen the rhetoric. We fully understand Israel's concerns about returning residents to their homes in northern Israel. And so, again, we've been making a full court press effort to try to help resolve these issues through dialogue. That said, we do remain concerned about the potential for escalation and for a wider regional conflict. And so Secretary Austin with the Department of Defense and other leadership throughout the U.S. government remain heavily invested in communicating with leaders throughout the region to try to really promote a diplomatic resolution and a lowering of the temperatures in the region. So we're going to continue to keep after that.
You mentioned returning Israelis to the north. Prime Minister Netanyahu recently made that unofficial war aim. Obviously, it had been a sort of unspoken goal, but now it's officially part of the war efforts. A few days after that decision was declared, you have really these incredibly brazen attacks, likely from Israel, with pagers and radios exploding across Lebanon. Does the U.S. support Israeli military intervention against Hezbollah?
Well, what the U.S. supports is Israel's right to defend itself. But we've been very clear to Israel and others from the very beginning that we don't want to see a wider regional conflict. No one benefits from that. Everyone loses. And so while we're going to continue to support Israel's inherent right to self-defense and to protect its people, we're also going to continue to work very hard with Israel and with other regional partners to, again, try to find a diplomatic resolution to these tensions. We believe at the end of the day, that is the best way to stabilize the region, to get people home. And related to that, really the key thing right now, and what we're very focused on, is a ceasefire and the return of hostages released from Hamas. So that we can begin to end this war in Gaza and start really focusing on the things that need to be done to ensure regional stability and also the safety and security of the Palestinian people.
How do you decide what is within Israel's kind of reasonable responsibility of protection, of defense? I mean, how do you draw the line between what is an okay defensive attack and then what would actually be an offensive maneuver? I mean, for instance, the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh, is that an offensive move or is that within their right?
Taking a step back here, I think it's very clear that Israel faces a significant number of threats, many of which emanate from and by direction of Iran. Through their proxies, whether that be Hamas, whether that be Lebanese Hezbollah, the Houthis, or other groups. And so the United States and Israel have a very long-standing security cooperation relationship. We have been very clear that our commitment to Israel's defense is ironclad, and we're not going to walk away from that. So we fully understand the challenges and the threats that Israel and the Israeli people face. At the same time, we also believe that it is important to ensure that the people of Gaza, Palestinians, can live in peace, stability. We've been having the discussions with our Israeli counterparts since the beginning of their operations on the importance of taking civilian safety and harm mitigation into account, and also, importantly, getting humanitarian assistance into Gaza. So we're going to continue to support Israel and their ability to defend themselves. We don't want to see another attack like we saw on October 7. We're also going to work with regional partners throughout the Middle East to get to a place where, again, we can ensure regional security and stability.
In the immediate aftermath of the assassination of Haniyeh, the U.S. sent a pretty significant amount of firepower to the region. But recently, we've seen it starting to kind of draw back. The USS Roosevelt has left the theater, I believe. Should this be seen as a sign of a diminishing threat of an Iranian response?
Yes, the Theodore Roosevelt Carrier Strike Group did depart the region. But to your earlier comment, we did deploy a significant amount of capability into the region. In fact, we have more capability there now than we did on April 14 when Iran conducted its unprecedented missile and drone strike against Israel. And we're maintaining that capability there for several important reasons. Number one, to protect U.S. forces that are in the region, but importantly, to support the defense of Israel. And we're going to, as I mentioned, continue to do that. It also gives us the ability to respond to a wide variety of contingencies should we need that capability. And so, I think from a deterrence standpoint, from a messaging standpoint, those capabilities are vital. But again, I'd go back to our main effort right now is focused on the diplomatic side, reducing the tensions in the region, reducing the temperature, and importantly, getting to a ceasefire and getting those hostages released as quickly as possible.
On that note, international media was recently allowed into Rafah, really the first time since the Israelis embarked on that operation. It revealed, apocalyptic images and scenes of destruction. Is the U.S. satisfied with how far and the extent to which the Israelis have prosecuted this war and protected civilians?
Well, I think everyone can agree that the conflict, the war in Gaza is incredibly tragic. I mean, we've seen innocent civilians, both Palestinian and Israeli, being killed throughout this conflict. And we've been, again, very clear to our Israeli partners, both publicly and privately, on the importance, not only the strategic imperative, but the moral imperative of taking civilian safety into account in conducting their operations. But I think it's also very important to understand the kind of enemy that Israel is up against, in the sense that Hamas, as a terrorist organization, has willfully embedded itself inside of civilian infrastructure to include mosques, schools, hospitals. They've built an underground tunnel network underneath Gaza that's almost the size of New York City. And again, one questions why the resources being spent on that versus taking care of the Palestinian people. And so as Israel is confronting the threat of Hamas, and trying to prevent another October 7, they have a significant challenge in going after that adversary. All that to say, no one wants to see innocent civilians killed. We're going to continue to strongly communicate to our Israeli partners the importance of that, and that's why we need a ceasefire right now, and that's why we need to get the hostages home.
Let's say we have a ceasefire today. Has Israel achieved enough, in your views, to essentially disqualify the military or eliminate the military threat that Hamas poses?
I think if you take a step back here and you look at what happened on October 7, when over 1,200 innocent civilians were killed, over 250 hostages taken, half of whom are still being held by Hamas, really from an Israeli standpoint, ensuring that those kinds of attacks can't happen again in the future, that's an existential question for Israel to address. And so again, we don't discount the threat and the threats that Israel faces in terms of the neighborhood that they live in.
Much has been made of Iran's involvement within the region, its problematic involvement for that matter. Recently, the US, the UK, and other allies have raised the alarm about the growing closeness between Tehran and Moscow, including the possibility that Russia may be helping Iran achieve a nuclear grade device. What can you tell us about that?
Well, it's a very concerning relationship. I mean, in addition to providing Russia with one-way attack drones that they've been using in Ukraine recently, we've seen Iran provide Russia with short-range missiles that Russia will be able to employ on the battlefield against the Ukrainians, again, bringing further death and destruction to the population of Ukraine. And so why is Iran doing that? Well, they're doing it out of convenience and out of the opportunity to potentially gain information, technology, and capabilities from Russia, to include nuclear and space technology. And so that is a very concerning development. As it relates to the broader Middle East, I think the concern here is that Iran already poses a destabilizing threat throughout the region. And this burgeoning relationship with Russia really is going to have consequences throughout the Middle East. And so, again, we'll continue to work closely with our allies and our partners throughout the region to monitor this threat and also to discuss, the way forward in terms of how we mitigate it.
I want to stay on Iran, but shift south to Yemen. The Houthi rebels have really been a kind of a thorn in the side of the U.S. and of really international shipping now for years, but especially in the last year. The Houthis managed to get, I believe, a ballistic missile and a drone into Israel since October 7th. Is U.S. deterrence working?
Well, I think it's important to understand what our focus is on the Red Sea, and that's freedom of navigation, working with international partners to ensure the freedom of navigation through the Red Sea, this vital waterway. And so our focus has been on degrading and destroying Houthi capability as it relates to their ability to do those kinds of attacks. We're not at war with the Houthis. We're not seeking a conflict with the Houthis. But what we will do is we'll work very closely with partners throughout the world to degrade and disrupt their capabilities. And you see us doing that very frequently. I think if you take a step back, it's very ironic in the sense that the Houthis claim that they're doing this to support the people of Palestine, when in fact what they're doing is hurting their own people in terms of preventing humanitarian assistance from getting into Yemen. They're targeting vessels that represent over 50 countries throughout the world, and unfortunately also creating a significant hazard for environmental damage and economic consequences throughout the Middle East and particularly the Red Sea region. So we are very cognizant of the threat that they pose. We're going to stay very focused on the objective of freedom of navigation, and this is something we'll stay after.
It's not just the Houthis, obviously. There are Iranian proxies that have been emboldened across the region over the last few months. How can the U.S. Really counter the threat that these non-state actors pose to countries like Yemen and Iraq?
Yeah, well, importantly, you say the U.S. Well, number one is we don't do that alone. We work, as always, with many partners throughout the region, throughout the world, to address these kinds of these threats to regional security and stability. And so we'll continue to do that. At the end of the day, our focus is on ensuring peace, prosperity, and again, regional security and stability. And so, you're right. The Iranians are continuing to sponsor these types of proxy activities that have an incredibly destabilizing effect. I don't think any community throughout the region wants that, and so we'll continue to work with others to mitigate that and find solutions.
Can you explain to our viewers how the U.S. security relationship with Iraq will change once U.S. forces are withdrawn?
So, first of all, Iraq is an incredibly important partner. They play a key role when it comes to regional security and stability. Through the U.S.-Iraq Joint Security Cooperation Dialogue, we've established a higher military commission that is looking at ways that our two countries and others will transition from the Operation Inherent Resolve, the global coalition to defeat ISIS, to a more traditional bilateral security cooperation between the United States and Iraq. We very much value the partnership that we have with Iraq. They've done incredible work when it comes to countering ISIS. But we also recognize the fact that ISIS still poses a threat throughout the region, particularly in places like Syria.
Let's talk a little bit about ISIS. How much, I've spent time in northern Iraq, in eastern Syria. There's still pockets, they're still littered throughout the region. How much of a threat does ISIS still pose, both in Iraq, in Syria, but also globally?
Well, if you go back in time 10 years ago and you look at the threat that ISIS posed in Syria and Iraq, certainly their ability to conduct the kinds of operations they did then has been greatly diminished. There's no doubt that they're down, but they're not out. And in Syria, you have a significant number of ISIS fighters who have been detained, along with their families. Working with countries to have those ISIS members repatriated back to their countries of origin is critical and essential. But we still see certain pockets, as you highlight, and so we're going to continue to work with the international community, the global coalition, to ensure the enduring defeat of ISIS, to address this threat and go after them. I think anytime you're dealing with an idea, like the idea that ISIS espouses, it's not something that simply can be turned off. You're going to have to continue to work to counter that, and we'll continue to do that.
This is a natural segue back to Hamas, because of course Hamas is also an idea. How do we move forward with the fact that this is a political ideology that will persist no matter what? How do we achieve that two-state solution, knowing that what Israel really wants is impossible?
I'll quote my boss, Secretary Austin, who says the best way to defeat an idea is defeat it with a better idea. And so from a U.S. government standpoint, this is why I think, again, the ceasefire is so important. Getting the hostages released is so important, so that we can start to work on the kinds of things that are important to the Palestinian people, and importantly, important to the region and the world when it comes to stabilizing, rebuilding, ensuring that the Palestinian people have a voice, and that we work towards that two-state solution. I don't think anybody should be under the expectation that that's going to be easy. If it was, we would have already have done that. But it's something that I think, if all the options are explored, that's the option that we think is the most viable in terms of addressing these issues long term.
I want to move just briefly to Ukraine. Long-range missiles. This is obviously, at the moment, what the Ukrainians want. The Biden administration has been reluctant to do so. Why hold back?
Well, I think, up front, it should be very obvious and absolutely clear that we are committed to supporting Ukraine. We're committed to supporting them for the long haul, and we're committed to enabling them to win when it comes to protecting their sovereignty and deterring future Russian aggression. So really, as we communicate with them, understand their needs, we have rushed in an incredible amount of aid since they were invaded to ensure that they have what they need on the front lines, but also working towards the future. Our policy in terms of long-range strike hasn't changed. Obviously, we continue to have discussions with our Ukrainian partners on that front, but really what we want to do is make sure that they have the capabilities they need to win on the battlefield right now, and make sure that Russia essentially can be checked, and then eventually Ukraine can take back its territory.
But you say that they have the skills to win on the battlefield right now. What they say they need is long-range missiles.
Yeah, certainly, totally understand. From a Ukrainian standpoint, you're under attack by Russia. Again, part of that is that capability, the capabilities that we provided them, like ATACMS. In a lot of cases, the Russians have already moved those capabilities well past the range of the ATACMS. And so, again, we're going to focus on making sure that Ukraine has what it needs to be successful. We're going to continue to keep that dialogue open. Our policy hasn't changed in the meantime, but there should be no doubt we're committed to supporting Ukraine for the long haul.
Major General, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. My pleasure.